finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hello, everyone. And of course, welcome back again to another episode of BS Free MD. And today we have another extraordinary guest. I love our guests, who embodies the very essence of courage and conviction. Dr. Christopher Rake is a 15-year veteran anesthesiologist from UCLA, known for his stellar record and high patient accolades. But when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, he took a stand that many would not dare to do. Dr. Rake predicted the vaccine mandates long before they were announced and became a leading voice against what he calls the COVID bioweapon shots. His actions led to his very public dismissal from UCLA, but he didn't stop there. He founded Citizens United for Freedom, known as CUFF or CUF, and is now leading a class action lawsuit against the University of California Regents, claiming violations of the Nuremberg Code. His journey is absolutely remarkable, and we're excited to have him on the show and share what's happened. Welcome to the show, Dr. Rake.
Well, thank you, guys. I'm excited to be here. Excited to be here.
Well, are you going to announce that you're now in an undisclosed location like so many of our other guests, or can people?
No, I'm a child of the law, so I get to be bold and just talk about the truth. When you're behind the truth, you don't have to hide. So, yeah, I'm in Florida now. I translocated from the left coast to the right coast, from the west coast to the east coast. So we're in a good, free place here where people are kind to each other.
Right? Isn't that the truth? I mean, gosh, that's like one of the first things I noticed, even when Tim and I were down here dreaming of our bucket list of place to live before we got here. We started looking during COVID, and I noticed the complete difference in attitude amongst the people, how they responded, not just because of the pandemic, but just in general. And then when we would fly back to the Pacific Northwest, and I thought, man, I didn't think it was that unfriendly up here, but wow. Right. And then, well, since you were at UCLA, LA area, oh my gosh, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah, there was some darkness there for sure. There's great parts about LA, but it's definitely liberal and taken over by the woke mind virus.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Like, I mean, I remember somebody said, I was talking to somebody at work, and they're like, California is God showing off. Like, when you think of the Central Coast, the South Coast, all of the coastal areas, and then you have the mountains, and then you have Yosemite and Joshua Tree, and like, it's absolutely amazing. And yet everyone comes to Florida and are happy, and we've literally reclaimed a swamp. I mean, that's what's that's the state. It's so hilarious to me.
When we first moved here, we were living in an apartment, really nice luxury apartment, but it was right next to a bayou, and it smelled like a swamp. The sulfur. And I thought, where we left California for this, man? But you're right, man. California is like God showing off. You have the highest point in the continental U.S. in Mount Whitney, at 14,000 some feet, and then you have the lowest point, I think, in the world in Death Valley, in the same state, just a couple hundred miles away. And then you have, like you said, the Central Coast. You have all the wineries there. You have Big Sur and Wairika and the coastal redwoods up there. Some of the oldest trees, like 2,200 years old, trees that go back before Jesus' time. Then you have Southern California with its beauty and all the beaches. Yeah, I'm a native, born and bred Southern Californian, and it's hard. It was hard for me to leave, and the weather was amazing there, but it got too crazy. They literally just passed a bill called AB 1955, where they said that, and they were doing this already, but they legalized it, where the teachers could take your child and transition them. So your boy would be called Debbie at school, and they may even dress him in dresses and that sort of thing. They may even give him hormones. So now that's legal. Literally the school teachers and the principals and all the, the personnel can lie to the parents and say, no, we're not transitioning your child. So that's got to fall. I don't think that's going to stay, but that was just an example of the craziness that was going on there.
No, I know we actually done a bunch of shows on that, and we've interviewed Pamela Garfield Yeager, who goes by the Truthful Therapist, and she was actually working in in not LA County, one of the most liberal schools, high schools, and then had this total revelation, and now stands out against it. She's left the state and works elsewhere, and speaks out against it, but just.
Well, she got injured, so she left.
Yeah.
She left. She was a guidance counselor, but she's trained as a social worker.
She was out of.
So she was out of work for, I think it was a total of 3 years. And in that period of time, they had one trans kid in the high school she worked, big, giant high school that she worked in. And then she comes back, and it's like every other kid has some gender thing, whether they're not. And she's like, okay, all right, I'm not an idiot. This is completely made up. Like, this is not a thing. This is a mind virus, whatever. So
but it is frightening. And the stories that you hear from families of their children being taken by the social services, and I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I think, this is a hill that parents will die on. And I think it's a really dumb fight for the other side to fight this one, because parental rights is where, people completely lose their marbles. So,
well, as a Christian, I think this is all spiritual, right? You look at Satan, what he wants to do is destroy mankind because he hates God and we're made in God's image. And so what's he going to do? He's going to take our children, he's going to abort them before they're even born. Over 63 million since Roe v. Wade, passed in the 1970s. And that now he's going to convert them into, boy and a girl and girl and the boy. They were at UCLA, they were doing these sterilizing procedures. They never talk about this, right? They call it gender compassionate care. It's not compassionate. This is the most grotesque, brutal, profit-making surgery that can happen, and they're sterilizing our children. The only positive side I can see to that is that it's mostly liberals that are doing that.
Yeah, no, they're literally. But again, that's back to the whole spiritual thing. It's always self-destructive. If people, I wrote an article for our blog called "The Prophets of Baal," and I spelled prophets like profit, like money profit.
That's you.
And how like these high priests during COVID, Fauci was like the dark pope, and it was never data. Like, we would interview somebody like Harvey Risch or Peter McCullough, and they would always have stacks of papers.
Yeah.
And they would quote from all these papers, and they'd say, okay, this is why I think this because of this evidence. Fauci was, I'm the science, just believe me. Well, There's nothing different than Elijah and the prophets of Baal standing on the mountain. Believe me because I have special knowledge of Baal. It was exactly the same.
Yeah.
And people, like, the more things change, the more they're the same. And these wicked interfaces, satanic interfaces, always end in child sacrifice.
Absolutely.
Look at every single, demonic cult from every culture in the world, whether they're throwing kids into a volcano or drowning them in the Ganges, it always ends in child sacrifice. So, and it's self-destructive. That's the part that I don't understand. The snake always eats its tail, and which you would think they would want, more little minions, but apparently not. And that's key. Satan doesn't care who wins as long as everyone loses, right?
Yeah, he wants to destroy humanity. But for our side, and for politically speaking and religiously speaking, we just need to have more sex and more babies. Let's just outpopulate them, right?
Yep.
Each dad needs to have like 4 or 5 kids. I've got 3, but that's where we're stopping. But or adopt, whatever it takes. They're cutting themselves off. They don't like marriage. They're aborting their own kids. They're generally mutilating, which is that's a human rights crime. I remember they were talking about female genital mutilation back in Kenya in like the 80s or 90s. And it was such the Amnesty International got involved, and they were doing these clitorectomies. Now they're doing them at UCLA under the guise of compassionate care. Isn't it demonic? It's just so, but this is what's, like you said, it's been happening for thousands of years. It's the same demons, the same spirits that were active, so long ago here in America with our prosperity in the 1970s, 80s, 90s. And we thought, oh, that stuff is silly. We believe in science and evolution. And what do you know? It's all deception. And guess what? It's like Robert Jastrow from NASA said something to the effect that, the scientists have climbed the mountain of knowledge. And this was in reference to learning about the Big Bang. And he goes, they finally get up to that last peak, and they get their head up over, and they see there's a band of theologians already sitting there.
Yeah.
Because what the science led them to realize is there's a Big Bang where everything comes from nothing. All time, space, and matter come into being. And it's like in the early 1900s, when the scientists started to realize this, and it was mostly started by Einstein, they said, oh no, we don't want this to happen. They were arguing, well, the universe existed into eternity past, and anything that exists into eternity past doesn't need an explanation for its existence. So either the universe existed into eternity past, or something outside of the universe exists into eternity past and created the universe. And they were coming upon the scientific data and by implications of the theory of relativity, where Einstein looked at it and he said, okay, space is expanding. Well, what happens if you go back in time? Oh, it contracts. And guess what? It all contracts into one single point where time, space, and matter come into being. So they said, oh, shoot. And they actually, like 100 scientists signed a petition to keep Einstein out of the country here in the US. They thought he was a heretic. And he threw, not to get too far off, but I just love this stuff, right? He threw this constant into his equations that allowed him to explain away the implication of the beginnings, right? That all time, space, and matter did have a beginning, because he didn't like it. He was a Jew by name only, not really religious. But he didn't like that implication, so he just fudged it. And some Russian mathematician came along and said, hey, you're totally lying here. He called him out. And he later said that was the gravest mistake of his career is to throw that constant in there and try to make the science meet his philosophy or back up his philosophy.
Yeah, but it's back to Galileo. Yes. It's back to all these, it's always these academics that own the knowledge, right? In Jesus' time, it was the Pharisees. They were the religious leaders that, were the academics that owned the knowledge. It's the same thing over and over again. So none of this should surprise us, which is a wonderful segue into somehow when COVID happened, you weren't surprised. You knew right off the bat. We didn't. We were 100% drinking the Kool-Aid for about the first 2 or 3 months. And then it started to become pretty obvious that this only killed old people or really sick people. At which point I said, you got to open everything up and let everybody get sick that can. I said that in March, which apparently is a bad thing to say because it freaked out our audience, but that's what appeared to me to be logical. And, but you were, the second it happened. So how did you come to that conclusion? That I find fascinating.
I think it was spiritual discernment, to be honest with you. I had gone on a journey. I grew up Christian and then became an atheist. And through my journey out of atheism back into Christianity, I was questioning everything. Well, how do, the first step was because of things like I just mentioned, the Big Bang, right? That, all time, space, and matter came into being. So there had to be something outside of time, space, and matter. Okay, that's God. Right? Eternal, timeless, timeless, spaceless, immaterial. Okay. And so I said, well, yeah, but who is he? Like, who is this God? Is it Jesus? I don't want to believe that because that's what I was born and raised with. Is it Muhammad? Is it Allah? And so I did my own research. Long story short, came back to Christianity on fire. Just all the questions that had led me away from belief led me back into belief. Now that I had the good answers for them, it was just like the logic, the science, the reason, poetry, history, it all just like focused on Jesus. And so that brought me to a place of like utter love for him and what he did for us on the cross, how he died for our sins to set us free for all eternity. But then I said, well, I got to tell people about this. Like, what do I do? And then I saw this guy, Todd White, on YouTube, and he was on fire. He'd just tell everybody everywhere he went about Jesus. And I was like, you can just do that? That seems illegal. Like, is somebody going to stop you? This is how we, we've all been exposed to MK Ultra. We've all been mind controlled, right? But even in the church, that's how muted our faith and our belief systems have become. So I saw him and I was like, wow, you can just do that. Okay, I've got to start doing that. I got to tell people, otherwise they're going to go to hell. And I got to tell my patients. And so I did that. And I told one patient, well, I didn't even know what to say or what to do. I said, I'm not an evangelist. If somebody challenges me, I'm not, even though I'm a physician and I've read all this stuff pretty well, if somebody challenged me, I wouldn't have a good argument, I think, or answer to the questions. And I was so nervous with the first patient I said it to. This is the third time I had the same patient. So I was sure that God was saying, hey, tell her. Okay. Because the Bible says through the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every matter shall be established. And I've noticed a pattern in my life that if he brings something up 2 or 3 times, he's trying to get your attention. You may hear like a line in a song, and then a kid at school says the same thing. You're like, well, that's weird.
Yes.
Or an ad on the radio or something is the same thing. Now you have 3 witnesses and it's like screaming at you. So had her the third time, and as an anesthesiologist, that doesn't happen. Normally it's the surgeon does. He may have patients that come back 2-3 times, but as I said, he's talking to me. So long story short, I said to her, I looked her straight in the eyes and I grabbed her hand like I was shaking her hand, and I said, "Do you know Jesus Christ?" And when I did that, I was so stressed out. I thought they're gonna fire me. And it turns out, I think it was just demonic voices saying, "You can't do this. No, they're gonna fire you." And there was a nurse that was sitting behind me. I was like, she must have heard me. She's gonna go report me. And so, by the way, that woman 4 months later came to me and she said, when you said that, she said, you had put your other hand on my shoulder and a power surged from my shoulder into my chest. And I said, really? That's amazing. I've never heard of anything like that happening. Because all I was experiencing on the other end was like, oh no, I'm gonna lose my job. But I just knew that I couldn't let people go to hell without them tripping over me first, right? Like, God saved me. Who am I to put my reputation above their eternal resting place? So that gave me so I started a prayer ministry at UCLA. I called it a ministry, even though it's kind of unofficial and on the down low. They found out about it, and they were trying to finagle a way to like get me in without violating my First Amendment rights and all these things. And so they brought me before like 6 different committees, and it was nerve-wracking. It was really, it was really difficult. But that built in me the spiritual courage and the strength to say, and by the way, this is all just because I'm looking at the Bible and saying, wait a second, nobody's following this stuff. Jesus says to go and make disciples. Jesus says to care about the poor, the widow, and the orphan, and go save people, pluck brands out of the fire of hell. And I'm looking around my church. Nobody's saying like, here's what we need to do. This is urgent. But I'm reading the Bible, and that's what it's saying. This is urgent. You got to do it. And so because I obeyed the Lord and I had less fear of man than I did of God, I feared God. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, right? I think he gave me insight and discernment. So what happened was, the first thing that happened was the flu vaccine. Now they've been doing this for a couple of years. And when it first came out, not a big deal. Then like a year or 2 later, they said, hey, if you take the flu vaccine, we'll give you this badge, buddy. It was a little thing that said flu season 2013.
Yes.
Oh man,
I remember
those.
Have that? Yes, we did.
Yeah. So it was a little virtue signaling, right? I didn't really make anything of it. And then they said a couple of years later, hey, you have to wear a mask if you didn't get the flu vaccine. So now they had the carrot, right? Was the hey, I have virtue signaling on my badge. Then they had the stick. Hey, you're going to be a pariah, social pariah. This was before 2019 or 2020 when people were wearing these masks. And so if you were wearing a mask in the hospital, you stood out, you looked weird, you looked like maybe you were sick, you're frail or something, people should stay away from you. So it was all meant to put social pressure on you to take these vaccines. Then a few years later, they said everybody has to take the vaccines, and if you don't take them, you have to get a religious exemption. So I was like, there's something weird going on here. I knew when they did the mask thing, I said, they're ramping this thing up. I know something's coming.
So so let's just push pause for
this is all about the flu.
Let's push pause for 1 sec. So
yeah,
when you started this prayer ministry and they started trying to get at you to stop this, what year was that? Like 16, 17, 18?
I think around 17 is when I started. And then around 18 through 17, 18 is around when they started the persecution.
Mm-hmm.
So why did they go after you? What was the premise? Like, did somebody complain?
So they had a false complaint, and I know it was false. So the first thing was they said, Chris, you were at surgery center. We got a complaint last month from surgery center. And I said, what was the date? And they said, such and such, April, whatever. And I said to myself, that's a Wednesday. I've never worked at UCLA in the past 10, because I work there 3 days a week, and I work at another hospital two or more days a week and take call there. But I said, I've never worked at UCLA on a Wednesday. This is a total lie. I didn't say anything to him. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. Just kind of like holding my cards close to my chest. And we got a complaint that you talked about God, or you asked about God, or something like that. Well, I never mentioned the word God. I would always say, do you have any religious preferences or affiliations?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I would say, whatever they'd say, atheist, Buddhist, whatever, Christian, I'd say, well, that's great, because I just like to offer my patients a blessing before they go under anesthesia.
Perfect.
And I can't tell you how many people actually cried. And I had two atheists, one a gay atheist, actually two gay atheists that demanded that I be their anesthesiologist. And I don't waver on the homosexual issue, but God loves everybody. And he wants everybody to come to repentance and redemption. And so I got to just love on people before they went under anesthesia, and they got to feel that. And I would pray for them, and I would feel a warmth literally come over my head, through my arms, onto these people. And I'd get moved with compassion. Sometimes I myself would be moved to tears that the Creator God knew this person before time even began. And he thought so deeply about every aspect of their life, and he created them with a purpose and a unique vision. And I could just, as I was praying, I just feel that. It was like a fatherly love. It was so amazing. So that's, did I answer your question? Did I get too far off track?
Right. No, you said that they had this false complaint because you knew it was the wrong day.
Yes. Yeah. So the first one was the false complaint that said I mentioned God, which I never really said God. I just I would bless people. And I think at the end I would say in Jesus' name. So I did mention that, but I never said the word God. And that was an opportunity for me. When they called me into the office, that was an opportunity for me to share the gospel. I'd been praying for the Lord to open up a door to share the gospel with my bosses. And so the boss that called me in was Jewish. And for the past year, I'd been keeping a note on my phone about how to witness to Jews through the Old Testament only about the coming of the Messiah. And so I had everything that you have, like, I don't know if you've heard of the Romans Road approach to telling people about sin and their need for a savior and Jesus coming. But it's all a mirror of what's in the Old Testament. So you can find all those verses pretty much in the Old Testament, Job 19:25, Isaiah 53. So all those things. So I got a chance when he's coming against me. My first inclination was, oh, shoot. Okay, I've got rights here. I've got religious rights. And I just remember hearing from the Bible, you don't have rights. Your rights are dead. You're buried with Christ. You're hidden in Christ. My job here is to speak to that man in his eternal resting place. So I didn't say anything like, hey, you guys can't do this. You can't violate my First Amendment rights. I said, hey, Michael, have you ever thought about what happens when you die? Where are you going? And when I said that, so he's coming at me with this false complaint, right? And I'm not living worldly. I'm living spiritual. I'm living like this is what Christianity is about. I felt a warmth come over my head and over my shoulders. I felt like maybe angels were anointing me or something. So that was the first complaint. The second complaint was a woman who is Christian, and her 17-year-old daughter had an IUD. So I talked to her afterwards. I said, ma'am, you said you're Christian. And she said, yeah. I said, well, first of all, an IUD is a terrible thing for a 17-year-old. I don't know what doctor recommended that. It just leads to promiscuity without any kind of barrier method, and, increased risk of STIs. And, but I said, also 1 Corinthians 6, can I talk to you about that? Would you mind looking at the Bible? And so, Christian brother to Christian sister, so concerned about her daughter, I said, hey, how are we raising our kids? And so she got really mad at that. Long story short, called and complained. So that was their end. That was actually kind of their way of getting in at me, is that somebody complained. That was a real complaint.
Okay, that makes sense. So then the flu shot, because it took me to see how insane the COVID shot was to start looking at everything else. And the flu shot evidence is right there. I mean, it's in Cochrane. Cochrane's done 2 analyses on the flu shot, and it does nothing that they say it does. I mean, the only thing that they could show with even any kind of statistical meaning was people that get the flu shot miss less days of work than that don't, and that's probably all confounded anyways. And so it does nothing. It doesn't prevent you from getting sick. It doesn't prevent transmission. It doesn't prevent hospitalization. It doesn't prevent death. It doesn't do any of those things.
No, and there's a huge study, I think, in Annals of Internal Medicine, if I'm not mistaken. It was in 2020. It was out of UK, and they looked at 176 million patient encounters. And it was such big numbers, such a strong study. They found no appreciable benefit in terms of mortality. And most of their patients were over 60 years old. So we're talking in the elderly, whom it should have a better effect on, right? And it said that, in fact, that the results of this are so conclusive that it can rule out prior studies. So if there are any other studies that were showing that this had a positive benefit to it, oh, there goes some things in the background. Got some wind going on.
I love that.
Getting a little bit of wind here. So basically it said that this is such a powerful study, it can overrule any studies that find to the contrary what this study is finding, which, as you know, as physicians, when you read a study, it's always, well, we need to do more study, the conclusion, right? The discussion. Right. We need to do more studies, and we can't conclude just from this one study. So that was a very unusual finding for them. So yeah, that was the context. And so just to tell you how I came into it, why I'm talking about the flu vaccine, I looked at the evidence when they started bringing the hammer down and saying you need an exemption. I was like, this seems just fascist, right? So why are they doing this? And so I'm looking at the evidence, and there's a study out of Hong Kong that kids that get the flu vaccine are more likely to get flu. There's a study, I think, in the military that showed that the recipients were 36% more likely to get a coronavirus. This was before COVID. And then, so I was pushing back on that. And I started a small texting group of all the people at UCLA who didn't want to take the flu shot and were standing up against it. And then at that time, RFK Jr. had paired up with Richard Jaffe, and they sued the UC system for this vaccine mandate. None of the administrative personnel told us that, hey, there's a pause because, the CBA, the judge, said, no, you can't do this. Eventually it was lifted after like a month or two, and they could go back and mandate that flu vaccine. But anyway, so I was letting people know about this. We formed a small group. And then in March of 2020, when Trump shut the entire country down and the NBA shut down on the same day, I said, he doesn't have authority to do that. There is nothing in the Constitution that says that the president can shut down commerce. He can't even shut down interstate commerce. He's supposed to facilitate it and make it just and fair, but he can't just shut down business. This is illegal. And so I was like, this is funky. There's something weird going on here. And I just knew, maybe from my spiritual fighting before, with the prayer and with the flu stuff, pushing back with all that, I realized they're up to something. And so I told my pastor at the time, I was at Bel Air Presbyterian, and I said, they're going to come out with a vaccine and they're going to mandate it. And I think she's a lot more liberal than I am. She's like, you're crazy. That's a conspiracy theory. And then when they came out with it in January of 2021, and we at UCLA were some of the first people to get it, I was like, no way, I'm not taking that thing. There's no compulsion. It was free choice. And then I was like, I guess I was wrong. For a few months, for like 6 months, I said, thank God I was wrong. I told my pastor they're going to mandate this thing. And, Kamala Harris said, I'm not taking that. That's Trump's shot. And Biden and Jen Psaki said, no, we're not going to mandate. And there's going to be no federal mandate of this thing. And then, of course, they come out and they mandate it, later in the year. And by the time December comes along, Biden saying, to those of you who are unvaccinated, you're in for a dark winter of disease and death. And I was like, you're crazy.
Yeah, that was, it was interesting because when our actual really honest red pilling started, where we really were like, okay, now we have completely shifted teams. And I'd always been calling, BS on the healthcare system because I was in the middle of, working for insurance companies and seeing how stuff gets mandated and regulated and all of this stuff. So, I mean, I have an entire half sleeve tattoo that's all old, ancient, debunked medical things like, plague masks and all of this stuff, because you have to remember that, we did a lot of really dumb things in the name of medicine and science. Yeah. So that was kind of my bias. But even so, I didn't see it. Initially, I was like, we don't know what's going on. You're going to have to lock down. They're going to get a vaccine eventually. Just, and then we went to work, probably must have been March or April of 2021. So we're working in urgent care, and all of these vaccine injuries show up. I mean, it literally was like, 10 or 12 patients a day.
And total silence in the media. And in the medical industry too, right?
In our group too.
Yeah, in our group. I mean, May saw a myocarditis. She saw a POTS syndrome. She hadn't seen a single POTS syndrome in her entire life. And we're seeing all of this stuff. Like, people get a shot of Moderna in their left arm, and their arm is all jacked up for 3 months. I mean, come on, something is wrong here. And we're telling our colleagues, like, this is like, I had delivered tons of kids. I had a giant pediatric practice. I gave gazillions of pediatric vaccines. You'd hardly ever, every once in a while a kid would get a fever and get cranky. You never saw anything like this. And it's like, it's obvious where it comes from. No, it can't be that. And I'm like, what do you mean it can't be that? It's the only thing it can be.
So weird.
Yeah.
And so after that, we were like, okay. And meanwhile, we're doing the podcast. We interviewed Peter McCullough in May of 21, and then Paul Alexander and all these other people, and we're like, okay, something is up. Like when Paul Alexander told us about how they kicked him out of a meeting, a quote scientific meeting, and the Department of Defense rolls into the meeting, and all of the quote scientists are convincing them that the reason that the vaccine study is sound is because they had such a massive number of people in the study that even a small difference, which is all they found, like a 0.7% actual risk difference, not relative risk difference, that it was fine. And then we interview Harvey Risch, and he's like, no. They needed about 350,000 people in that study to actually show that it wasn't random. And they had 43,000. They needed almost 10 times a bigger study. And these guys are just sitting there, just sucking it up, because the whole thing was run by the Department of Defense. That's what it was. They wanted their vaccine. They wanted their mitigation strategy. They wanted everyone to get paid. It was crazy.
Well, not only that, the studies that they were relying on, that same, preclinical study that you're talking about with the 22,000 in each arm, 4 times as many people died of cardiac death in the trial arm than in the control arm. And then they crossed over, right? They did this very nefarious thing where they took everyone that was in the control arm and said, well, we don't want to leave you as a long-term control. We don't want you 5-10 years out to be able to be compared to those that took the vaccines. We can see, all the myocarditis and heart attacks and strokes and all these things are going to happen because of these shots. So they said, hey, in a humane way, we want to offer you the option to take the vaccines. Well, of course, all the people that signed up and volunteered for that were all pro-science because they wanted to help move the science along. So they all believed in it, right? So they took it. And their all-cause mortality rate was, if you calculate it correctly, the way I calculate it, 43% higher in the trial arm, all-cause mortality, 43% higher in the trial arm than in the control arm. And like I said, 400% as much in terms of cardiac deaths. So they already knew that it should have never been passed.
They did two things that were really nefarious. They broke the randomization by vaccinating the control group. That was number one. And then number two, which is really heinous, is they brought the vaccine age limit down to 6 months. And that was also to cover the control group, because they didn't want 10 years from now where there's all of these 22-year-olds that are jacked up with heaven knows what problems, and then there's a bunch of 10-year-olds that have nothing. Right. They never wanted that comparison. And so they
I hadn't thought about that.
No, but that's the only reason. 6-month-olds, you were better. It was safer. It was significantly safer to send your kid to school in a life jacket than to vaccinate them for COVID, because about double the number of children die in backyard pool drownings
Yep.
than died from COVID. And I think it was Marty McCarry went through and he looked at like in the height of COVID, in the alpha strain, he looked through every single pediatric death. And these kids
40,000.
were essentially dying, like, leukemia, multiple congenital anomalies. Like these were not like your happy kid that went to kindergarten, got sick and died. And so
he looked at 40,000 kids in that study, and not a single one of the healthy kids died from COVID.
No.
And we're vaccinating them with an unknown agent. There's only one reason.
Totally new platform. That was the thing. Most vaccines, I'm sure you've talked about this many times in your show, but most vaccines take 10 to 20 years to develop. The fastest was, I think, measles, or as mumps, I can't remember, but it's 4 years for that vaccine. That's the fastest. But you need 10 to 20 years to see the long-term differences. So when they came out with this Operation Warp Speed, and we approved it, and I thought, this is all. It just felt like being in Russia, like communist Russia back in the 1940s, and all the propaganda. If you don't wear your mask, you're going to kill grandma and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. It's laughable. Now, I was just watching a video from CNBC with Shepard Smith. He used to be on Fox News. He went totally crazy. And he was talking back 3 years ago about how 2 masks were better. They were
exactly.
better. 3 masks were even better than 2.
I remember that.
But we've known for 50 plus years all the face mask evidence. And what they do is they look at ILI, influenza-like illness. None of those. There's like one study out of Bangladesh that Stanford's supported, but every other study has shown that they do not. In fact, they increase your risk of ILI, probably because you get bacteria sitting in there, and then you get infected with the bacteria that are growing on that nice little petri dish of a plate of your mask. But we knew that, and that's another reason why I knew this was all nonsense.
Well, there isn't even evidence. This is the one I love. There isn't even evidence that surgical masks in surgery make much difference. Like they're there so that the surgeon and the assistant don't drool and drip into the patient, which makes sense. The mask is perfect for that. But this idea that you're going to respiratory virus into an open wound and somehow the patient, no, that's not how you get an infection. It's from crummy hand washing and having the patient open too long. I mean, all the stuff that we already know.
Well,
so I'm itching to kind of get ahead to the point where you refused to take the religious exemption.
Yes.
Yes. What's can you tell us the reason behind that you chose to not even?
Yeah, that was another.
I'll just take a religious exemption and just said no, and then.
Yeah, I could actually still be working at UCLA right now if I had taken possible. They were denying religious exemptions, but it's possible that I could still be working at UCLA had I taken the religious exemption. That was another point where I felt like I got revelation from God. I was sitting in church. My church is very active. God Speak in Thousand Oaks, Pastor Rob McCoy. He's kind of helped lead the charge. It was like God put us all together. There were a lot of warriors for freedom in there. It's just weird that in a small town of 20,000, suddenly all these movements, PERC come out, CUF, my group, comes out, Firefighters for Freedom comes out, LA County Free, which is another firefighters organization, comes out of that. All these organizations came out of that one small church. And anyway, so one of the nights they were having an informational meeting. This is before I didn't want to be public. I didn't want to say anything, but I was like, somebody's got to say something. And I was sitting there and I realized, wait, when you sign that religious exemption form, what are you doing? You're asking for permission, right? Well, why do I need to ask them for permission? God gave me this body. I'm the temple of the Holy Spirit, and I have authority over this body. So I realized because I got the form and I was filling it out, just proud. Yeah. Rah, American. We got the First Amendment, protects my religious freedom. And I'm going to fill this thing out. I'm going to stick it to them, and they can't touch my body. And it was like God hit the pause button and said, hey, think about it. You're actually asking them permission to what you can do with your body. And in doing that, you're implicitly agreeing with the lie that somehow they have authority over your body. So when you actually think you're exercising your rights, you are acceding to their demands. And so the way I put it is this: when someone comes to assault you, because this is what it was, it's assault with a needle under the guise of the Milgram experiment, right? The white person comes up, we need to do this for the health of everybody. We've got the evidence here. We'll just explain it to you why our fascism is appropriate, why we need to subjugate your rights and all that stuff. So they make it look nice and appealing. But you know, it's like when someone comes to assault you, like let's say they come to punch you in the face, you don't say, hey, wait, I got a really tender left cheek. Is there some sort of form I could sign where I'm exempt from your face punching of me? No, you say, no, don't you dare punch me. This is my body. If you punch me, I'm punching you back. I'm calling the police, right? I'm going to hit you back. So I realized that's what I had to do. I had to just stand up and say no, that I have authority from God over this temple of the Holy Spirit. And I don't need to sign any of their forms because I don't need to ask anybody for permission what to do with my body. So it's all part of the whole lie system. They want you to buy into the lie.
Now, we all know that in the corporate world of medicine and anything else, it doesn't work that way. That if you don't tick the boxes and play by their rules, and I did the same thing with something in a place I was employed at, where I was like, no, I don't want to click the boxes on your little LBGTQ game.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And I shouldn't have to, I should just say, no, I'm taking care of my patients. And it doesn't work out so well. So how did this transpose into the big video that shows you being walked off? Is that what happened next? Can take us to like how you got escorted off the campus and what happened?
Yeah, well, so I had been texting with this group, like I said, at UCLA. There's about 15 of us or so, mostly nurses, about the flu vaccine. So we already had this little text group going. And then August 5th, I was on vacation in Oregon, Crater Lake. And the Lord kind of had spoken to me the day before, August 4th, I think he'd spoken to me and said, and warned me of something's up. It's a long story I can't get into, but August 5th, I'm driving home and my dad says, hey, did you hear what happened in California? They're mandating all the healthcare workers take this thing. And my stomach just dropped. And I went, oh no. And it was almost like my life flashed before me. I wanted to be a physician my whole life. How am I going to pay for my kids? How am I going to pay the mortgage and keep the house, the roof over their heads and pay for their private school and put food on the table? And I'm like, wow, this is horrible. And then I got mad because I looked at who signed it. Well, it wasn't even signed. It was Tomas Aragon, the head of the California Department of Public Health. And Newsom had gone to the person prior to Aragon and said, hey, let's implement this vaccine mandate. I can't remember who it was. I think it was a female. And they said, no, we can't mandate this, right? We don't have the authority to do that. So she got fired, or whoever it was got fired. And then Aragon got put in his place, in their place. And so he filed this unsigned memo that was put up on their website. So I was like, oh, shoot. Okay, I'm backed in a corner, right? Like I'm a cat in a corner, like a tiger. I'm fighting for dear life. I'm going out fighting. And the Lord had, one of the ways he spoke to me on August 4th was he had all these butterflies flying around me as I'm climbing up to the top of the ridge at Crater Lake. And that's always a sign when he brings butterflies to me. It's a long story, but it's a sign that he's trying to get my attention. So the next day when they come out with this mandate, I'm still traveling home from Oregon. We're at a motel and I'm like, I got to read Butterfly Effect. And that's a powerful story. If you've ever read it, it's a great story. You got to read it. It only take you like 15 minutes to read. It's like a kid's book. It's got lots of pictures and there's only like one sentence per page, but very moving about how one person can change the course of history. And I was like, whoa, that's what you're trying to tell me. So I'm reading, okay, God, okay. I'm reading like Joshua Chamberlain. He changed the tide of the Gettysburg battle. And because of him, we were able to have a united states of South and North when Hitler and he took over. And then we were able to mount a big defense and push back against the forces of tyranny to make sure they didn't come and take over our part of the land. It's all because this guy, Joshua Chamberlain, stood up. And so I was like, okay. So I started texting all my friends. I said, hey, send this out to 5 people that you know that are on our side and do it within the next 10 minutes. We've got to build this coalition. And I said, what do we call this thing? Is it like healthcare workers for freedom? And I said, well, I don't want to limit it to just healthcare workers, even though that's who started it. Now, what do we call it? So I came up with Citizens United for Freedom. And it grew up until it ballooned into like 500 people on our text string. And that was really encouraging, right? Because if you remember, during the COVID shutdowns, you were alone and you thought you were the only crazy person that didn't believe in masks, and you're sitting in your siloed house, which is exactly what they wanted. They shut down the churches and the pubs, but they left the marijuana clinics and the abortion clinics open because churches and pubs are where ideas spread. And they could not afford for people to realize they weren't alone and that they weren't crazy. So that's kind of the start of it. And then I just started coming out. People were inviting me. I stood up in church and gave a talk. And I said, this thing is terrible. This is fascism. We need to stand up against it. This is tyranny. And then got invited to go speak at a rally at Santa Monica. Somebody filmed me there. And I was a big embarrassment to UCLA for that. Then they had to go on public media and say he has nothing to do with UCLA. And I never wanted to say I have nothing to do with UCLA. I never said those, even though I wasn't commissioned by them. But I just noticed how many UCLA doctors toe the mainstream line, and they never say these are my own personal beliefs, right? You just assume, they're a UCLA doctor and they must be speaking on behalf of UCLA. So I didn't mind, I didn't necessarily didn't want people to think I was affiliated in speaking on behalf of UCLA, but at the same time, I thought somebody's got to balance out the voices that are speaking on behalf of UCLA and aren't quoting the science like I am. So that's kind of where it started, and then October 1st is when it was supposed to be mandated and implemented. You're supposed to have your 2 shots by October 1st, and I show up to work because I told everybody, do not quit. You make them force you out. You have the legal right to do this. They don't have a legal right. And I thought maybe I still had a lot of hope that they were bluffing. They weren't going to actually go through with the violation of my civil rights like they did. So I showed up October 1st and they said, you're not on the schedule, but it's a good thing you're here because roommate, we need help there. Can you take over roommate? And my sense of relief and joy that day, I felt like I've got my job back, right? Like I can work again for free. They did back down. This is great. So I show up on Monday, October 4th, thinking the same thing. And I call in and say, hey, I know I'm not on the schedule, but I'm here ready to work. And they said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm ready to work. Well, the vaccine mandate went through. And I was like, and by the way, just to pause right there, those 2 words are words of the tyrants that don't mean what we think they mean. Vaccine, it's not a vaccine. We know that because it doesn't protect you from getting it. So I don't like to use that term, but I'm just saying what they said. Mandate is an order by the court to command somebody to do something. Well, there's no order by a court to command us to take these things. So both those terms are false. Anyways, he says, the vaccine mandate went into effect on October 1st. And I said, yeah, but you guys let me work October 1st. And I thought, you had seen the error of your ways and realized this was illegal. No, I don't know anything about that. And so I'm sitting there doing administrative stuff, going through all the trainings that we have to do. You know how it is in corporate medicine. They send you all these emails and sexual harassment and who knows, all that stuff that you never have time to do when you're a physician, right? But now I'm like there for 4 hours because I'm not working. So I might as well get it done. Well, they send 2 security guys up to me. Have you seen the video? I think I sent you the video where I get walked out. Oh, I got to send it to you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so they send 2 security guys up to me and I am like nervous. And they said, you need to wear a mask because I wasn't wearing a mask. I didn't wear a mask around the hospital. That also ticked them off. And they got really mad at me about that. And I showed them the evidence and all that and how it was a violation of federal law to mandate, it's Title 21, Section 360 BBB says you cannot mandate an EUA product. Well, the August 5th, 2020 memo from the FDA said the masks aren't an EUA product. So they were in violation of federal law at least once. There's so many other laws they violated through the mask mandates that it's silly. But anyways, you got to wear a mask, and they were trying to put a mask on me. My chairman of my department at UCLA, Maxime Cannison came with the 2 security guards, and Maxime went and got me a mask. And I was like, I said, I'm leaving. I'm not wearing your dumb mask. So I was walking down the stairs, and I could barely walk because I'm thinking, I've been here for 15 years and they're treating me like a criminal. Mm-hmm. My heart was racing. I was so shaky, and I could barely like take the next step because my legs were about to give out. I started recording, and he said, "Sir, you can't record here." And I said, "Okay, probably true because it's indoors. There's no expectation of privacy. But once I get outside, I'm going to record this thing." So I did. And then I held the camera up and asked these guys what their names were. And I said their names on camera, and they just acted like thugs. And they escorted me out, and I said some things about freedom and willing to go all the way. And not going to put my job, my career over my kids' heritage of liberty. And so that went viral. That video got, I think, 1 million views in like 8 hours. And then they shadow banned it and did all that stuff that, they can't tolerate having us. Mm-hmm. And then I got on Fox News and a bunch of other news outlets and that sort of thing. So it just took off from there. And then fast forward to October 2022, and we filed a lawsuit against the University of California, against the Regents. We have a class action lawsuit against them.
So how's that going?
So they tried to file a motion to dismiss, and we survived that January 16th. So praise God for that. We've got a group of great lawyers, Warner Mendenhall and Jeremy Friedman. These guys are phenomenal. They're in it for the right reasons. They're not fakers. They're willing to fight on principle, which is hard to find because most lawyers are fighting on money. They just want to pay. They don't care. They're not actually interested in justice, but these guys are. And they're bold. They're courageous. They are saying the things that need to be said in their filings. They're talking about how the University of California has been implicated in past medical crimes, like tests on newborn babies. They were putting these catheters in their umbilicus and testing their blood pressure in the aorta, fishing it all the way up into the aorta and putting them on a tilt table and doing all these experiments on them. And then they had, there may be some ties with them to the eugenics movement in the early 1900s. So they have some history there of not following medical ethics. And for me as a physician, this was a huge violation of medical ethics, right? Because one of the 4 pillars is patient autonomy. I can't tell a patient that she has to get sterilized or do something for the good of society because she already has 4 kids and she's on welfare. I couldn't say, I have to sterilize you. I'm sorry. It's so that, you don't take up tax dollars, right? That would be unethical, and they should come after my license for that. And yet here you have doctors saying, we're going to vaccinate, quote unquote, vaccinate you against your will. You need to do it for the good of society. And I just said, this is a total violation.
Well, and I'm totally tracking with you. I think there's some spiritually discerned deception when it comes to vaccines, because we've gone down the vaccine rabbit hole like crazy now for the last, 2 years at least. Yeah. But it's really, really weird because we've talked about this numerous times with guests. If you had a patient come into the OR that was Jehovah's Witness and had the no blood transfusion on there,
right?
And you said, this is stupid. Their religion is stupid. I'm going to transfuse them and save their life. And you legitimately saved their life. They would fire you and you would be charged with assault because you assaulted that patient. That was black and white, absolutely black and white. The number of extra forms when I was doing OB that you had to fill out to sterilize somebody on welfare because they were so scared. Usually I swear, but I'll respect it. That you would be out there running sterilization clinics, sterilizing the poor. Right. If somebody came in with good insurance and she was 25 and had 2 kids, game on. But if it was a welfare patient, it was a completely different thing because they were so nervous about this political thing of, coercing people that were poor to get sterilized. And then all of a sudden, as soon as you say pandemic and vaccine, it was Germany in 1939.
Totally. That's how I felt.
Like it was completely different world. And then it was because of vaccine. I mean, we got our last Doc Tales with Cocktails show taken off. It lasted on YouTube for maybe 8 minutes because I went completely bonkers about if you're going to work for the Harris campaign, you have to be fully updated on, what the CDC recommends for the COVID vaccine. And I said, which means this episode probably can't go on YouTube, but because I'm saying the same thing. I mean, how can you mandate something that has done exactly what respiratory viruses do? It's mutated itself into a cold. So it's essentially zero danger to almost everybody. Not everybody, but almost everybody. It's a non-sterilizing vaccine, and it doesn't stop transmission. And there's no really good data that it, makes a difference in mortality or hospitalization. Right. So, and I looked at me and I said, because it's not science, it's a cult. That's why.
Yeah, it is. It's totally, isn't it weird? So that's been the great thing too, also, is to see, wait a second, those of us on the side of faith were buying into the cult, right? We were questioning our faith because the science was contradicting it. Well, evolution, science says healings can't happen today or whatever we believed. And so now it's actually almost fun to be alive in this moment, because you're realizing, oh my gosh, God was right. Stop fearing man. Stop believing man. Believe in God. Trust in him alone. He's your creator. He loves you. But if I can get back to I got a little off track there when I answered your question about our lawsuit, because this is so important. We are alleging 5 or 6 different claims. The most important to me is the Nuremberg Code claim. And the beautiful thing about California law is that in Health and Safety Code section 24171, the Nuremberg Code is codified into law. So you can have a private right of action. Normally you have to file like an international kind of violation of peremptory norms, to say with something called jus cogens, which means compelling law. That it doesn't matter if there's a law, for it or against it. This thing is so clear. It's such a violation of human rights. You can't kill a bunch of Jews and put them in a concentration camp, right? So, even though there's no national law against that, the idea is that this principle that it's so compelling, it doesn't matter. You can still be, prosecuted on that. So we do have jus cogens in our lawsuit, but we have the benefit of 24171 in California Code. Unfortunately, that's the only one that hasn't survived scrutiny. So I wouldn't call it scrutiny. That's a legal term, and I'm a doctor. But the first judge on our case said, okay, you can go forward with that claim if you have the right class. They didn't say that I could go forward with it because I didn't actually take the injection. They're saying I'm not part of the experiment that we are alleging. And even though we said, but Dr. Rake is part of the control group. And they got information about him. And she said, no, you have, Judge Desautel said, you got to go back and amend your class. So we have added people to the class that got injured by these things because they were compelled to take it. They didn't want to take it. They said no, but they didn't want to lose their jobs. And so they were disabled. One of them was Nurse Angela. Actually, I don't think she actually qualifies if I look at the legal framework, but I'll just give you her story because it's really interesting. Within 12 minutes of getting the shot, she got tachycardic and hypertensive to I think it's like 230 or something like that. And then she just suffered all kinds of problems after that. And they said, no, the doctors in the ER, they were all whispering amongst themselves. This is from the shot, but they didn't say it. They didn't put it in the chart. She was contacting the NIH, the CDC. She was on board with them. She thought these vaccines were good, and she was trying to figure out what went wrong with this batch or something, what's going on. She slowly came over to our side. But the long story short, we amended the class, and then they changed the judge on us. And this new judge has said, no, you can't make those claims. So he narrowed the scope of our Nuremberg claim. He basically said that, well, a Nuremberg claim has to do with people who are tortured and held captive against their will. And we said, well, no, that's actually in the code itself. It doesn't say that. It just says, no consent for an experiment. Then he said that he found that the FDA approved vaccine was approved. Well, we know, I'm sure you're probably familiar, and your audience is probably smart too, that there was no commercially available FDA approved vaccine or COVID bioweapon shot. The their Comirnaty, which was approved, but not available. That was the brand name. Only the generic, or the BNT 162B2, whatever it was, that was available. And this is like, again, this was part of that Russian propaganda thing where it's like a double play where August 23rd, 2021, the FDA approved it, but they approved Comirnaty, and it was never available. And it came out in Branson or something like that, a case for the military where the judge said, yeah, there is no commercially available Comirnaty. Therefore, there is no approved product. But our judge found differently. He said there's, these FDA approved vaccines have been approved, and a couple other things that he did. And so my lawyers have the courage to file a petition for a writ of mandamus. Now, writ of mandamus is you're petitioning the court above, the appellate court, to say, hey, can you tell this lower court to follow the rules, to do the right thing? Mm-hmm. It's a risky position, right? For lawyers in their career, they don't want to get a bad name. And also for our case, it could make the judge biased against us that we went over his head. But we so believe in what we are saying is true and what he's saying is totally false, and that we have the science behind us, that we're pushing this forward. And so for me personally, this is the most important, because I actually made my stand partly for the atheist, or I would say maybe even mostly for the atheist, because all the Christians could get the religious exemption. But I couldn't. It's literally like God gave me this picture of Jesus turning to the atheist and saying, sorry, buddy, I got my religious exemption. I guess you're up a creek. Like, I couldn't see Jesus doing that. He loves everybody, right? So for me, that's the most important part of our claim, because it has the potential to send shockwaves throughout the globe and say, hey, there's a Nuremberg Code case in California that was just adjudicated in favor of the plaintiffs. So, could scare the living, daylights out of the people that are going to try to do this kind of thing again and say, we don't want to go there.
The thing that always just absolutely astonishes me is the complete and utter crushing of common sense. Like, this idea that you have to mandate a vaccine of any kind is just nuts. Like, I mean, I get it maybe for the military. Like, if you have some kind of special vaccine for a bioweapon that they're going to potentially be exposed to, maybe that kind of makes sense in that scenario. But every other scenario, it doesn't make sense, because, I saw some genius on Twitter. He goes, well, hey, conservatives, what if the virus theoretically killed 50% of the people that got it, and we theoretically had a vaccine that was 100% effective and 100% safe against it? Wouldn't you mandate that? And I was like, no, because you wouldn't have to, because everybody would get it voluntarily.
Exactly.
Right. You just made my argument for me.
Exactly.
Right. You just made my argument. You don't have to mandate iPhones, because everybody wants an iPhone.
Right.
You don't have to mandate marital sexual relations, because that's kind of part of the point of being married. Like it's just this idea that they're mandating it means it's a pile of crap by definition.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, listening to what's happening in the court case, the part that boggles my mind, and I think other people's, is that one person, like a judge, has the power to just kind of look at what you're doing and go, well, no, and cite his reasons, which could be totally based on like incorrect fact and not even on what the truth of what the Nuremberg Code is, and then have definitive, I won't say definitive power, but like you said, you're afraid to kind of almost, I get the lawyers always want to follow chain of command. It's like the military, and they don't want to step over his head, because then he might be not even offended, but mad, or it will affect things. But it's like, what else do you do if you have this one person in a court system who
well, it's the Court of Appeals,
the power.
You just keep going up. That's one
of the arguments we made in our petition for writ, was that he was prejudging things before we even had a chance to bring the evidence before a jury of our peers or their peers. But it's interesting, I've made that argument too, that the argument for mandated vaccines falls apart at both ends of the spectrum, right? Let's start with 0%. Well, if it's 0% effective, then you can't mandate something that doesn't work. It's not ethical. If it's 100% effective, well, why would you mandate it? Because the person that took it was 100% protected from ever getting that disease. They couldn't get it no matter how many unvaccinated people they were around. And so then my question is, well, if the argument falls apart at either ends of the spectrum, is it really true that it's valid somewhere in the middle there? And I just don't see that being a powerful argument, right? And so like if you go to 80% effective rate, and then somebody would argue, well, you need to get herd immunity in that situation because, you get 80% people injected with this thing and they're 80% protected each. It's going to stop the spread of this disease. And so those who are immunocompromised won't get it. But again, like if you go down lower, where's the cutoff? Is it 70? Is it 60? Is it 50? Is it 40?
Well, and then what is the risk? Not just what is it doing, but just that I'm always about, is there more harm to this thing than good?
That's the other axis, right? Which is it's safe and effective, right? So we haven't even talked about safe. We've just talked about effective. And so, and that's the whole other thing. But then this whole concept of herd immunity, they stopped talking about that 3 years ago. Because if you are up to date now, you're on shot number 9. Guess what, kids? It's not going to cause herd immunity. It would have done that a long time ago.
Right. Fauci got 6 shots, and he recently, just a few days ago, said, I've had my 6 shots altogether, and I've had COVID 3 times. Hello. It doesn't take a doctor to realize it's not working, buddy. Just stop taking the shots, But really quickly, to get back to where I'm at right now in terms of the lawsuit, this is a very important lawsuit. It has the potential to protect not just the 220,000 employees in the UC system, but all California public and state employees. Because a couple of the claims we're making, one is the Tom Bain Civil Rights Act, and this is that this is like they made this for terrorism, and so basically you can allege without showing any bias or hatred that they violated your civil rights. So we don't have to show that, but they did absolutely violate our civil rights. There's a California privacy protections in the California Constitution. The UC has not even resisted that, almost like they've acquiesced and said, hey, at least they've shown that they don't have a strong argument in their favor. So I think, we're close to winning on that. And even if we just win on that point alone, that they violated each individual's privacy rights, that could set precedent that anywhere in California, both public and private employer, they can't ask you about your medical history. This is already known. This is already from federal ADA law, right? They can't ask you anything that's not related to your job. So, and they certainly can't compel you to take a treatment. This is not a vaccine. It's not a preventative at best, which it's not. But they recognize it doesn't prevent. They will say, well, it keeps the symptoms from being less. So let's say it's a treatment. Well, the Health Defense Freedom Fund against LAUSD, the judge in that case sent it back to the lower court because he said, you can't say these are vaccines. That has to be adjudicated in a court of law, because one of the allegations in the Health Freedom Defense Fund's lawsuit is that these are not vaccines. And yet the judge was saying, well, these are vaccines. Jacobson, you can't, so it's okay to mandate them. And their whole argument was, no, you can't mandate it because it's not. And so the law is slowly coming around to justice, to our side. And we have a good chance of setting great precedent in California, protection for all the people, all workers in California. We are trying to raise money right now. We have a goal of about $1 million. So if anyone in your audience would like to support this cause, it's going to protect people if we're successful in even just one of these claims, not even the Nuremberg Code claim, although I'd love to have that one be successful. We have the ability to protect all California workers. That's 40 million Americans right there. And that's got to reverberate across the United States and give employers and government agencies fear next time they try to pull this kind of nonsense. So if you're on board with what we're doing with this lawsuit, please go to givesendgo.com/Nuremberg now. Make sure you spell Nuremberg correctly. So if you'd like to help us out, we'd be really appreciative of that.
Yeah, this is This is great. I really, this is what I think is going to happen. I could be completely wrong. I think that there's going to be a couple of these cases, whether one of them is yours, whether it's one of these cases where I forget what state. There's a couple states suing Pfizer basically for
Texas, Missouri,
yeah, and I think Missouri for essentially false advertising for claiming that it would stop transmission when they had absolutely zero data that was the case. Those guys have limitless budgets. But what's going to happen is once one of these cases breaks through and there's chum in the water, we're going to have every single private jet flying,
yes.
Ambulance chasing thirsty
tobacco
lawyer.
industry.
Yeah, it will be tobacco 2.0 times a million.
Totally.
Because once there's a precedent, then these multi-million-dollar firms that do class action can put their money at risk knowing that they're going to get a huge payday. The way it is now, it's hard because you're taking on these gigantic multinational companies and governments, so there's limitless budgets. But one of these is going to break through. You just know it. And then the dam is going to open. And then I think it also helps other cases like yours potentially, because UCLA, which is massive, is going to, are they going to risk going to the Supreme Court? Are they going to risk, $1 billion punitive damages settlement when they can just settle and go away? I mean, I think a lot of the stuff just gets settled and these guys go with their tail between their legs going, okay, we overstepped. We're not doing this anymore.
Well, I'll tell you what, my goal for this was never about self enrichment or self-protection. Like I said, I could have taken the religious exemption, but I felt like God gave me the courage to stand up. And I literally was so angry that atheists who had the same scientific objections couldn't avail themselves of the religious exemption that I had, right? So my lawyers know, the whole team knows, we're not in this just to get an easy payout, an easy settlement. I can't make a prejudgment, but my ultimate goal is to make sure there is long and lasting change and there is fear in the hearts of any employer or any government agency that wants to do this again. Now, if that means they come to us and say, hey, here's $500 million. This won't go on the books. Chris, you could walk away $10 million, $20 million, whatever. I'd say, no, I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this to protect people because not everyone has the courage or the relationship with God and the faith that I do. And so that's the gift that I have, and I have to use it to protect and to love people, just like Jesus did. He loved those who were less fortunate than him. So for me, it's not about the money. It's really, I want to get something changed. And so, yeah, we'll fight it to the Supreme Court, whatever it takes.
I love that.
I like punishing these guys with money, though. There's something about that makes me.
Oh yeah, I can't. I mean, you mentioned $1 billion. That's the number that I'm thinking. I think $1 billion.
Well, when you have that many employees and you start getting into punitive damages, it just gets completely ridiculous. It's not stratospheric money; it's moonshot levels. Like when you see if you read any of the case law, when drug companies get sued, and it's like for. Like Pfizer had that case with Lyrica and not Celebrex, the other COX-2 inhibitor, and they paid the biggest criminal penalty. It wasn't that they just got fined because they broke, they did something potentially unethical or whatever. They had criminal penalties. They bought their way out of jail for 50, 60, $100 billion. It's staggering how big these settlements are. And I mean, UCLA, I mean, come on. I think $1 billion is like the least.
Well, all said and done, they got, I think, close to $1 billion between the 3 tranches of COVID payments. The whole UC system did, as I recall. I'll have to go back and look at the numbers. Wow. But the law allows for just one of our claims. I think it's the privacy claim. Don't quote me on that. My lawyers would know better. Anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 per infraction. Now, if you take 25,000 times 220,000 UC employees, I think that's $5.5 billion.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's hard damages. That's not punitive damages. That's not you willfully did this to people that sacrificed their life and their time for you. I mean, That's the other side of this. It's that, and I don't know, this stuff. I get less angry than I used to get just because I keep reading the Old Testament and going, guess what? It's been going on for a really long time.
Yeah, it kind of frees you up, doesn't it?
Yeah, like I just, it's but the other side of that coin is I think you have to take kind of Naomi Wolf's more Jewish view sometimes to go, guess what? These people were continuously being disobedient, and eventually they were crushed. So to assume because we're the United States, we have a special ray of hope when we're unrepentant. No, I don't think that that's the case, and it's harrowing. I still am hopeful, and I still think that we may even be in a revival right now. But
I think so.
We're not solving. I was thinking about this when I was taking a shower this morning. We're not solving these political problems and these overreach with political solutions. It's not going to happen. If you want to really fight the fight against the trans movement and against abortion and all of these things, these are spiritual battles. When people's hearts come back to God, all of those political problems take care of themselves. When you have a relationship with Christ and a great marriage, you don't want to kill your offspring. Like that just goes away. You don't want to, your gender confusion, though it may be real, you have a place to put that, and you don't want to mutilate yourself or your kids. It all goes away. And I think we have to recognize there's clearly a place for courage and standing up in the political arena. But what I love about your story is it's not politically motivated. It's spiritually motivated that drifted into, quote, politics. That's the only way that this changes. Our hearts change when my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray. Humble who? Humble the Democrats, humble the progressives, humble themselves.
Amen. Keep preaching.
That's what it is.
Keep going, man. I'm loving this. It's Sunday morning on a Thursday morning.
Exactly.
He can keep going.
Yeah, she puts a pot and just like, okay, we're done.
Not quite.
But
no, that's great. But it's interesting because I never wanted to be in politics. I thought politics was dirty, and this was a lie from the enemy too, right? Satan was telling us, hey, it's okay, you can have your church, you can go on Sundays, but don't you bring it in to law. Religion has nothing to do with law. When in the whole time throughout humanity, throughout our history, law is always about declaring one act immoral and its opposite moral. Well, if you have no standard, and especially no objective standard for morality, how do you write any laws?
Exactly.
You're just kind of flowing with the wind. Well, the tides of culture say it's okay to abuse kids. Oh, is it okay to abuse kids? Yeah, let's put in the law. What's to say? Next, pedophilia is going to be the next thing, right? Because if you don't have an objective standard for law, hey, pedophilia is just minor attracted persons, MAPs, and they have a sickness. And if they have a sickness, then you shouldn't. If a cocaine user, has a sickness of using cocaine, you don't give them more cocaine, right? If it's really a sickness, you don't give them what they want. So I'm getting off track here, but you're right. It's a spiritual thing. And I was so depressed and so angry for a long time because when you're at your son's basketball game and you're the only one who's not wearing a mask, and they stop the game to come over and hold a mask to you, and you say no, and then they kick you out and you come again the next week and they're more angry. And it's like satanic gobs of parents, wave after wave coming at you. I'm just sitting there like, I can't believe these are the people. It's like zombies took over my community where I was born and raised in Nuremberg Park, California, conservative community. Kids, that I grew up with who are now parents. We're both parents together. And I went to school with these parents. And now these parents are coming against me, telling me, they called me a pedophile for not wearing a mask. They called me a monster. I have it on video. So that just warped my whole view of humanity. Like, how could these people that I knew just get this woke mind virus and totally change in an instant? And, had I been focused more on God, I would have said, hey, this is a spiritual battle. Ephesians 6, you war not against flesh and blood, but against the powers and the principalities that are in the heavenly places. And so that's what we need to war against on behalf of these people that are persecuting us. We want them to be saved. Why? Because I got saved and I didn't deserve it. I'm a filthy sinner. I have no right to call myself a Christian. I'm a hypocrite. Jesus hated the hypocrites, and I find myself sinning almost daily. I probably am sinning daily according to his great standard. But the beautiful thing is his blood covers it all. It doesn't just conceal it. It says, John the Baptist said, behold the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world.
Right.
I'm totally clean, totally free, totally clear. And even those moms that call me a pedophile, the one mom that called me a pedophile, man, I pray for her. I just bless her. I just hope that she comes to the light of the gospel message, that there's freedom, there is love, there's joy in this thing. And we're happy, joyful warriors in this thing now. You know, I'm getting on my horse and I'm starting to ride on this thing, man. I was hobbled and war wrecked before and you know, not able to walk in the battlefield because I was just like so overcome by all this stuff. But now it's like, okay, we're starting to get our pace here, and we are winning. We're winning like crazy. I mean, you look at like the Chevron decision, you look at this LAUSD decision, it's not vaccines. You look at this guy, and I think it was in Michigan, got $50,000 for a flu vaccine mandate. The woman out of Tennessee or Kentucky, Blue Cross Blue Shield, she got a $700,000 award for the COVID vaccine and for denying her religious exemption. So we are winning. It's not being published. I'm keeping a list, and I'm like in the hundreds now of all the cases and the culture wars that we're winning. Tractor Supply, John Deere, Harley Davidson, they've all given up their DEI departments. Even Microsoft has pared down theirs. I mean, on every imaginable front, we are just killing it. So I just want to encourage people, keep fighting, keep fighting.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, a vision kind of came to me, and it's this, you know, there's a volcano and they're throwing the virgins into the volcano. And we have all of these church groups camped out singing Kumbaya around the bottom of the volcano and not running and grabbing the virgins and saying, hey, stop it now. Amen. Stop it now. And, you know, which is fascinating, because Dietrich Bonhoeffer's, I don't know if you read that book by Eric Metaxas, one of the greatest biographies in the history of mankind.
Yeah, it's great.
But that movie is coming out Thanksgiving this year, and what perfect timing.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I watched the trailer for 2 minutes and I'm just like all goosebumps. Like, it's so good.
Well, that was one of those books that I was reading on my commute to and from UCLA, you know, an hour in the morning, hour and a half in the afternoon. And Bonhoeffer, what a great story that is. It just amazed. That was one of the things that motivated me to do what I did. And that's why history is so important, right? Who was it? George Santayana of Harvard said, those who cannot remember history are condemned to repeat it. Mm-hmm. And I just committed myself to not letting this Nazi regime take over. And man, we pushed them back. You know, I was predicting back in August of 2021, I said, they're going to come out with an injection every month. And they're going to say, you know, in a couple of years from now, it's going to be compound A. It's not even going to be a vaccine. Compound A has been shown to cause human flourishing, and you have more kids when it actually causes you to have less kids, right? And all the stuff they're going to tell you. And you won't be able to go to your kid's basketball game. You won't be able to go to the grocery store, the movie theater, unless you have your vaccine passport up to date. In fact, in Israel, they were already doing that at that point. If you hadn't gotten your fourth shot by a few months after I had given your app, they had an app on the phone, your app would turn to red. You had to go in and get your fourth shot.
They did that in Canada as well.
Okay, yeah, but here,
for a while.
Here, talk about stuff changing, never changing. Okay, Israel. Okay, hello, the only Jewish state in the world has an exclusive contract with Pfizer, a German drug manufacturer, that you cannot make this up. The vast majority of the testing of the Pfizer vaccine was done in Argentina. So Germans misbehaving in Argentina and Germany and contracting exclusively, the Jewish state picks that up. And I'm like it's like a comic book. It's like we live in a simulation. Like, who wrote that play? Right. No one would believe it. It's like when in
most
the past,
people wouldn't be able to follow the storyline. They wouldn't get the parallels.
When in the past has a German drug manufacturer ever done anything bad to Jews? I mean, it's like, come on.
Well, and that's the great thing about being a Christian in these times. It's exciting. I've gone from depression and despair to hope and excitement, because we we know how the story ends, right? And we're seeing this play out. Revelation 13, unless you have the mark of the beast on your right hand or your forehead, you can't buy or sell goods. Well, they try to do that. And in Sweden, they've already done that. They put your vaccine in a chip that was buried in your hand. How did John, 2,000 years ago, live in a desert island with no electricity or electronics? How would he even imagine such a thing, right? And then it says, I think it's in Revelation 19, it talks about how the river Euphrates is going to dry up, and that the kings are going to come all against Gog and Magog, and all those kings are going to come against Israel. Well, the Euphrates is now 10 centimeters away from being so dry that the hydrothermal plant or hydroelectric plant below, downstream from it, won't be able to operate. They'll have to shut down. It's drying out. You see all these things happening, and it says that the kings of the earth will join in with Jezebel and her sorcery. Well, check this out. The word for sorcery in the Greek, do you know what it is? It's pharmakeia.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So we're seeing that happen.
Yeah.
So
wow.
It's just, I mean, again, we could talk to you for hours. And, since you only live about 35 minutes away.
I'll send you on your way.
We will. But that said, we have actually reached the conclusion of an interview and finished on a positive note, which is amazing, actually. Because normally I bring in some last minute Debbie Downer thing. And
exactly.
So
that's my gifting, is to encourage people. I've had enough of the negativity, and so
absolutely
we got to keep.
We got to have you back and talk about how this affected your family and relationships and all that stuff, because that's a whole other can. It's one thing to be the fierce warrior, but you still have to keep the home front.
It was a lot of stress. So let's put it that way. Hey, if you can remind people just to go to www.givesendgo.com/Nuremberg now. Really appreciate any help you can give us. We are fighting for the common man. Like I said, I didn't have to take up this fight. I could still be working at UCLA today.
Absolutely. No, I'm glad you gave another plug for that. We'll put it in the show notes. And then you're also on Twitter, right? At Chris Rake, MD.
Correct. And I have a Substack.
Yeah, tell us about your Substack briefly.
So I opened this, started trying to write 2 years ago, and I just had writer's block, and just suddenly something opened up recently. And so I've got one called My Hope Secures. It's about religious stuff. And then the other one is, it's called Science, Society, and the Supernatural. And that is about how all this stuff is coming together, kind of focusing on the political and the science aspects of it. Recently, I've been talking about our case, but I'll go into other things about how the vaccine doesn't work and that sort of thing.
Wonderful. Awesome. Yeah. So that's all under Chris Rake on Substack.com.
Yeah, I think one of them is Chris Rake. The other one is Christopher Rake. I have to.
Okay.
But they're called My Hope Secures and Science, Society, and the Supernatural.
Okay. Wonderful.
Outstanding. Thanks again. This was great. This went a lot of different rabbit holes that I really enjoyed, actually. I'm glad it was very
good.
Based. I enjoyed that.
Well, I love hearing. I haven't heard other doctors talk about the understanding spiritually like you guys have. So it's really exciting. And what a pleasure to meet you guys and here on the video. And thank you so much for hearing me and for just giving an audience to my story. And hopefully we can help a lot more people, 220,000 or 40 million, or maybe all 330 million Americans.
Absolutely. So one small step at a time, right?
Amen. Yeah.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
But we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible. We can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.